let's also open this meeting formally. So welcome everyone to the second round of Prevent webinar on plastic assessments and plastic leakage assessments. This is the second webinar, which concentrates on national plastic assessment methodologies. And we have today Margherita Puccino from the Global Plastic Action Partnership with us presenting the NAM tool. And we have Lynn Sorrentino from IUCN till the end of the month, and then consulting afterwards, presenting the UNEP IUCN hotspotting methodology. The first session had been focused on municipal waste management and plastic leakage assessments, is 2 weeks ago, will be available within the Prevent Hub. This is the second at a higher level on top-down methodologies, and there will be a third one concentrating then on global models. This webinar will be recorded, so I would ask everyone to switch off the microphone. And yeah, and Margherita, would hand over to you straight into the first presentation.
Okay, then, yes, I see, Lynn, you sent the PDF. Okay, so after my presentation, then I'll try to open the email and see if I can share yours. Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen. So back to my PowerPoint. Here, just a second. Okay, good. Okay, so good day, everyone. My name is Margherita Puccino, as Stefan mentioned. I'm the Global Metrics and Roadmap Lead at GPAP, so Global Plastic Action Partnership. What is GPAP? Just to set the scene. So we are a platform hosted by the World Economic Forum, and for the past few years, we have been working closely with countries around the world to support their efforts to reduce plastic pollution. And let me start with a simple question. What does it take to move from ambition to action? I don't mean in theory, but in a way that is grounded in real-world priorities, constraints, and opportunities. So this is basically the space where GPAP works in. And we now support locally led data-driven strategies in 25 countries. And each one is different, but we're all focused on the same goal, which is tackling plastic pollution in a way that is inclusive, practical, and aligned with national needs. For that, our approach is it sits on 3 core principles, which is local ownership, because national strategies need national leadership, evidence-based planning, because data helps to bridge debate and decision, and inclusive partnership, because lasting change only happens when everybody is around the table. And you'll see in a minute why those core principles are important, thanks to our NAM tool. So today, what I would like to share with you is our tool and our approach, and how it is useful to countries to start preparing to potentially what an implementation under a future treaty would look like. So what we do is we support the creation of national plastic action roadmaps. These are voluntarily multi-stakeholder strategies that help governments identify priorities, align efforts, and build political and technical momentum. So our roadmap is built thanks to the National Analysis and Modeling Tool, or NAM for short for friends. This is an online analytical tool, which is based on the methodology of Breaking the Plastic Wave framework that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And at its core is a data-led process that helps align the diverse actors. We start with a baseline analysis. So this is a snapshot of the country's plastic pollution landscape situation. We focus on municipal solid waste. So this is our scope. And this is broke down into 5 product categories, for example, like bottles, rigid plastic, flexibles, etc. And then we map these materials that moves along the system, from consumption to collection, recycling, and ultimately leakage into the environment. And we calculate also, so we said plastic waste generation, but also treatment rates, leakage, and we also estimate GHG emissions, cost to governments, job creation, and some social implication. Now, primarily, we rely on secondary data, and we know that this is often scarce, scattered, or inconsistent. So because this is due to maybe different projects or different studies, they use different scopes and assumptions. So for the tool to work and to try to close these gaps also, we include some preloaded, ready-to-use data repository from like in the plastic waste, for example, from the World Bank, from plastics. And this facilitates filling the gaps and engaging stakeholders in the discussion. Because what I want to highlight here is that our added value is not like a very highly detailed scientific study for the baseline. There are much stronger and more granular tools. One of them, Lynn will talk about, that there is a waste flow diagram that you have learned in the past webinar. I know there is a spot model that Professor Costas Vallis will explain next week. We have the hot spotting. So our added value is a baseline that is co-created, is a co-created exercise developed with what we called a metric advisory group. So which is a group of 20 to 30 national experts in a way that we don't chase profit numbers, but we aim for realistic, usable insight that basically everybody in the room can stand behind. This is about building a common reference point that unlocks action. I'll give you an example. Here is what like a baseline analysis looks like in practice, just an extract. You see the QR code on the top right corner. If you want to read the whole thing, is a flow diagram that shows basically how the plastic waste generated moves along the system from collected to recycling to what leaks into the environment. And we also try to provide more granular insights, such as difference between urban and rural, for example, which are key, we'll see then later, to design targeted solutions. Then what happens? Once we establish the baseline with the tool, also in the tool, we move to a business as usual scenario. Basically, we ask here, what happens if nothing changes? So like a hands-off approach. If the tool projects plastic waste and mismanagement trends towards 2040. Basically, we offer a useful benchmark that shows where current system will and will not bring the country. So we take the insights of the baseline, we project them into the future, and we look at some metrics like plastic pollution, cost, jobs, as we did for the baseline. Why 2040? Because this is close enough to us so that we can imagine how the future would look like. But at the same time, it's far enough that we can see how solutions that we apply tomorrow, let's say, could make a difference and make an impact. This is not really about forecasting the future, but it's more exploring what is possible. So you see here, for example, you can create custom scenarios to see how the future again could look like if immediate and coordinated action is taken across the entire plastic value chain. So we simulate upstream strategies like elimination, substitution, redesign, and downstream measures like better collection, sorting, recycling, etc. Everything is adapted to the country's existing policy, expert judgments, with the metric advisory group that I was talking about before, and the country's level of ambition. To give you a concrete example, on the left, you see the business as usual trajectory. So plastic waste keep rising in line with economic and population growth, but the systems basically can keep up. As a result, mismanagement waste increase sharply. On the right, you see the system change scenario. So a path that is shaped by a coordination, yes, of upstream and downstream actions. And here we bend the curve. So waste is still produced, but we reduce the overall plastic utility. So there's for how much plastic waste is generated, and the mismanagement drop significantly. This helps stakeholders to visualize the biggest opportunities and where they lie, and what it takes to change course. And then the last step that we can do in the tool is once we modeled the scenarios, we deep dive into what they mean, not just in terms of the plastic flow that you've seen before, but also across national priorities. So again, we assess global gas GHG emissions, fiscal impacts, and job creation and disruption. So basically what we do is that there is a set of interventions across the whole value chain, reduction, reuse, material substitution, etc. And we highlight the impact that comes from combining those actions from both sides of the value chain. And we show basically why is the mixed approach that matters. And we layer on additional metrics, as I mentioned, GHG, for example, in order to show the potential benefit for each action, as you see here in the graph. So how GHG reduction, for example, can align with the NDC, net job gains in the recycling sector, reduce fiscal pressure over time, etc. So this is the third part. And then basically we built a roadmap table which links each intervention to the lead stakeholder or sector, a suggested timeline from here again to 2040. And then we highlight existing pilot case study that exist in the country, because this is a way to show that solution exist and they are already working in the country, and that can help basically moving from theory to practice. I just want to say that these roadmaps are not the final word. They are a starting point for coordinated action that has to be owned by national stakeholders. And in terms of being inclusive, there is also an additional critical dimension for this work that we do alongside the NAM tool, is the gender equity and social inclusion work, because plastic pollution doesn't affect everyone equally. The impacts and the opportunities to participate in solutions, they are shaped by gender, geography, income, occupation, etc. So this piece of work is not just an add-on, but is a core input to the analysis itself. And we start with a context-driven analysis of the inequalities along the plastic value chain. And we look at how different groups like women, informal workers, indigenous people, etc., interact and are impacted by it. And these findings inform directly the design of policies and interventions. And this is how we want to make sure that the action on plastic pollution doesn't widen existing gap, but helps us closing them. As a final message, I would say that as this webinar is organized around the topic of tackling plastic leakage for a global plastic treaty, I want to say that as the treaty discussions are moving forward, hopefully, many countries are turning to national planning through strategy, roadmaps, like this one, for example, action plans. And this is a way to build readiness and coordinate actions. And I feel that a flexible, evidence-informed process, which is grounded in inclusive engagement, can really help generate momentum, attract support, future alignment on whatever the treaty outcome will be. And GPOP, as an impartial partner, is offering tools and lessons learned from our journey. So happy to take any questions you may have at this stage or later. Thank you.
Wonderful. Margarita, thanks a lot for your input. I would suggest that we listen into the second presentation and then we take a couple of questions after this, if there's not a really urgent and burning question. So Lynn, then over to you.
Okay. Can you share? I'm still having struggles with the sharing option here. It seems like. Thank you so much, Stefan.
Sure. Share my screen.
Right. Thank you. And thank you so much, Margarita. A lot of what Margarita has just presented is much more developed from some of the work that UNEP and IUCN did with our guidance. And this is where I first met Margarita, was 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, working on this particular project. So my name is Lynn Sorrentino, and like Stefan said at the beginning of the meeting, I'm with IUCN until the end of the month, and then I'll be moving in January into some independent consulting. So today I'll talk to you about the work we at IUCN did with UNEP on the National Guidance for Plastic Pollution Hotspotting and how to shape action, basically. So next slide, please. So the guidance itself is available on the Plastic Hotspotting Lifecycle Initiative webpage, and it's a guidance that includes instructions in the guidebook itself, modules, tools, and tutorial materials. Everything's available at the QR code, and also I'll share the QR code at the last slide as well. So next slide, please. This methodological framework was developed in 2019, 2020, just at the beginning of COVID. And it was co-developed by UNEP, IUCN, the Lifecycle Initiative, and our authors include colleagues from Shaping Environmental Action EA and Qantas, as well as our UNEP colleagues who helped review it. So next slide, please. The guidance itself, as I mentioned, is composed of a guidebook that explains the entire structure and how to do the type of national hotspotting that we've been doing. It includes modules, and the 9 modules are 6 technical and 3 strategic, and these are posted. These are posted here in the slide, and basically the idea is to take an inventory of the plastic flows in a country, characterizing the waste management, modeling it, the polymers, sectors, applications, and the hotspots, and then identifying waste management challenges, then looking at several layers of a GIS structure, including the hydrology of a country, to put this into some visualizations of charts as well as maps, and taking the data that comes out of this, collecting the right data from Comtrade, Botchi, national data, et cetera, and modeling it, then leads you into these reports. And so if you go to the next slide, please, Stefan. The reports and the tools are putting together basically the situation, most of the situation in a country. And so it's data collection and modeling, Python, Excel, et cetera. And the tools model and generate calculations for what polymers are leaking into your environment in your country, what applications, whether it's packaging or automotive, et cetera, what sectors are happening to be the primary drivers of the amount of plastic pollution in your country. And from there, overlaying that again, as I said, with the GIS maps. And so the results bring to policymakers charts and graphs that really show the situation broadly within the urban and rural areas and within the country. Next slide, please. So when you're using this guidance, why the results are useful is that it goes beyond the quantification and qualification. Similar to what Margarita was explaining, it shows you the bigger picture, and it does link to then policies that are in place, monitoring frameworks that are in place, the data that's needed or is available, and taking these science-based assessments to inform, improve, or create policies or regulations within a country. And some of this does tie in directly to what's going to happen, maybe, fingers crossed, with the plastics treaty, because guidance and regulations on that a country will have to accede to, and they will have to then monitor and track, is basically the foundation of the UNEP IUCN guidance. So setting targets, understanding the issues, implementing the actions, linking it to monitoring programs and policies is really the core part of what this guidance does. And mapping out the plastic leakage from the types of leakage to where it is and how it is happening helps policymakers, NGOs, private sector, the waste management sector, et cetera, all understand where the plastic is causing problems and how to solve the issues. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there's inside the guidance, there's the polymers, the applications, and the sectors, such as medical, fishing, tourism, waste management, et cetera, that are contributing to plastic leakage and pollution. So We have used this guidance within IUCN's scope on this across 8 different pilot countries in the Mediterranean, Asia, and Africa. And you can see in the polymer hotspots, it highlights, for example, LDPE. I don't know if you can see this very well, but LDPE and PET, for example, and polypropylene are the bigger leakage polymers, for example, in that country. And these are screenshots from some of the reports. So I don't want to identify a specific country to highlight its challenges. But then looking at these charts really helps then the policymakers understand, okay, if we've banned plastic bags and yet plastic bags are what we're seeing in our leakage, there's a problem. So there's that gap that happens that can then hopefully be assessed and mitigated by in-country changes. So the next slide talks about waste management. And one of the challenges we've seen also in our work broadly with this is that waste management in a lot of countries is non-existent or really not very effective. And so the hotspotting guidance allows a country, the technical people, to develop sort of this grid, this chart here, and the red items are negative impacts, so they are hotspots. The green ones are positive, so that's going well. The white ones are neutral, and then the gray ones, for example, in this case, were not assessed. And the guidance also provides estimates on how to determine the impacts and the amounts of what open burning is happening in the country. So the waste management and the open burning situations are also aspects of what the guidance and its tools can help produce at a national level. Next slide, please. So what I mentioned earlier too about the GIS applications within our tools of the guidance, you can take a country's hydrology, its demographics, look at the urban and rural areas, and overlay this with the waste management data and the leakage data so that you end up with an understanding of, okay, perhaps in the urban areas, there's better waste collection, and in the rural areas, there's no collection. And so then your hotspots are going to look different. So this also gives policymakers and members of ministries, et cetera, the visuals that they need to say, this is where we're having the most challenge. And it relates to the rivers, the hydrology, and the coastal areas as well. So again, one of the exciting things about the UNEP IUCN hotspotting methodology is that it allows you to have a multiple layered approach that can be used across a multiple stakeholder approach when you're addressing these issues. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that Stefan is proposing we talk about at the end of today's presentations is about interventions and what do you do? So how do you use this, these different tools, whether it's a NAM tool or the UNEP IUCN tool, to create real change? So the IUCN or UNEP IUCN tool, at the end of all the charts and the graphs and the maps, you'll end up with a list of actionable hotspots. Once those are determined, then you can look at it from a sustainable production side, consumption side, from waste collection, from waste infrastructure, from recycling, from these different classes of interventions, and then take those specific interventions and determine whether or not they're actually working. And so each actionable hotspot can address plastic pollution at one or multiple stages across the plastic value chain. And so these interventions are really the next step once a country has their national report in moving beyond and saying, what can we do to address this issue? And so that's one of the more exciting parts, I think, of what comes out of these reports. Next slide, please. Perfect. So Margarita was also the lead author on our overview of the regional results from Eastern and Southern Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Southeast Asia work that we did on hotspotting. And again, what has come out of these reports is that improved national action planning is really the end goal, and then the implementation and the actual monitoring and effectiveness of policies and the cooperation also between the different ministries, whether it's Ministry of Health, Ministry of the Environment, Ministry of Water or Oceans, et cetera, so that they're all talking to each other with the waste management aspects, with the waste management stakeholders, et cetera. So really shaping action is to take these interventions look at the instruments that are in place in a country, bringing that all together with the data and the knowledge and what the models are showing, to then move those results into action, but also so that they can be monitored as part of a monitoring plan, hopefully nationally and in some cases regionally. Next slide, please. So within these reports too, when we finished a lot of this work over the last few years, each time we would have what would be called sort of an acceptance meeting / validation meeting with the countries. And we worked directly with the countries, with various ministries, the academics, the private sector, et cetera. And we came up with certain things like policy assessments and gap assessments of where the policies in a country could be improved or created or aligned. Also, the economic impacts of this work and what does it mean when there's plastic pollution in a coastal country for the coastal ecosystems, for example. So delivering on materials that the ministers, the implementers, the policymakers, the lawmakers, et cetera, can then move forward and say, there's an economic impact or there's a policy gap, is also part of this bigger picture work. So using the tools, using the guidance, creating the data sets in the reports is one thing, but then moving it beyond into actual effective policy, not just policy making, but improved policy making, improved national action planning. And some of the work we did, in fact, did contribute to, for example, South Africa's Marine Action Plan, Marine Litter Action Plan, Kenya's Marine Litter Action Plan, Mozambique's, et cetera. So it's really about taking the knowledge and what you've learned to move it on to something that can actually be delivered for an improved, healthier environment, healthier communities, better livelihoods, et cetera. Next slide, please, Stefan. I would just like to say thank you. And again, the QR codes that are on the various slides go to different things related to the guidance itself, the IUCN plastics work in general, also to some of our reports that we've done throughout the different countries. And so happy to take questions and happy to stay in touch too, as you have my email there. So thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you, Margarita, as well. And here's our questions. I was making notes.
Thank you, Margarita. Thank you, Lynn, for this very sharp presentation. And yeah, before we open the questions for everyone, I actually would have one, maybe two questions. One asking you a bit about the details and the challenges in implementation of the tools, applying the tools with partners, and how did you overcome these? And then I think you partly mentioned it already. How does that help then partner countries to come up with concrete actions and build the trust that the treaty is a good thing and can be done? Maybe two insights on that would be quite helpful. And then everyone feel free to ask your questions, raise your hands, use the chat, and have 30 minutes for discussion. Maybe Margarita, you would start first. You would present it first, and then Lynn could come in with her perspective.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lynn, for the presentation, and Stefan for the question. So, challenges, yes. Well, there are a lot, always, right? But I think what comes to mind is what I mentioned before about the data availability. And it's not only availability, but also like consistencies, because sometimes, again, data is scarce or not consistent or scattered, so it's difficult to find. And again, this is probably because projects use different assumptions, different scope, etc. So sometimes it's difficult to build, let's say, a coherent national picture. Also, from our multi-stakeholder approach, what we have seen is that sometimes it's a challenge to have, private sector and public sector speaking to each other, and then how to include also informal sector. And also what I mentioned at the end of the presentation about marginalized groups, such as women, informal workers, and rural communities. So sometimes they're not fully represented in the assessment. So I would say these are the challenges that we encountered on a day-to-day basis. And how we overcome it, I just go back to our approach in terms of a co-created process, which is multi-stakeholder. So we really try to have the most representation in the room, so that first of all, people talk from different sectors and different places of the value chain talk to each other. And what I love is, this ha moment when like the room understand what the situation is, because sometimes coming from different point of views, you don't have the same understanding of the situation and what it takes, to move forward. So I would say that's my take on challenges and how we solve them or try our best to. And I really love that moment when this happens.
Okay, thank you. Is there, Lynn, on from your perspective, from doing the tools, actually, is there anything you'd like to share?
Just briefly, I put some notes in the chat about the challenges, and it does align with what Margarita was saying. Technical capacity also within the countries to run the assessments. I mean, not every ministry has a lot of people. Not every ministry has a lot of people that have the technical skills to run like an Excel spreadsheet to get a Python tool going, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some technical skills that are needed for our tool. As well as just some basic understanding of some of the ways that you can create, for example, what Margarita was showing, some of the diagrams. Like you need to have some of the technical expertise within whichever ministry or group or NGO or whatever is doing this work. Also, I think understanding too the regulatory policy, the different frameworks that are in place, the legal frameworks as well that are in place. If you understand also where your policies are coming from, then you can, again, align this a little better to make sure they're effective. You really have to have that strong understanding of what's happening at the municipal level, what's happening at the national level, and how it connects really well to each other. And I was just going to also highlight Patrick's question in the chat about the costing of this. And this is something in terms of these interventions. Okay, so you have a report. And so you know your situation and you know that there's, what the situation is in your country. How do you then think about which interventions are most cost effective? We were just asked to do this for the ASEAN region on another project that I'm working on, and creating a costing tool for the departments or the agencies that are going to be doing this is quite complicated because you have to figure it out based on each national context. How many staff do they have? How many days of work is it? How much equipment do they already have? How much do they not have? What are the costs of what they're going to be trying to doing, in the future in terms of things? So costing is actually extremely difficult from a national level, but it needs to be included in I think the national action planning, the national budgets and things like that. And when you're thinking about if you happen to be in a ministry that's going to be attending, say, the next INC negotiations for the plastics treaty, understanding what this is going to cost is a huge part of our discussions. The discussions are really on the funding mechanism, because if you're in a country that has no waste management and 3 ministry staff to do this work, it's going to cost a lot. And how do you define that? So this costing question is quite challenging as well. So I'll stop with that.
Super, thank you. Margarita, the NUM tool has a costing kind of layer. I remember. Maybe could you share your perspective and your approach on the costing? And then
Sure.
coming back. Yep.
Yeah, sure. No, this is an excellent question. And so indeed, NUM includes this, let's say, cost estimate part. But as Lynn mentioned, this is an extremely difficult exercise to do. So I want to highlight, and underline the word estimate here, in a sense that what we're interested in too is give a picture of what is the difference. So the delta basically between what could cost to the country, to the government, the business as usual scenario versus a system change where, like, again, plastic waste generation drops, mismanagement drops. And how do we do that? We have proxies to estimate based on recycling rate, recycling rates. So depending how much more recycling you need to do in terms of volumes, collection rate estimates, sorting estimates. These are based on studies that have been done previously at global level. And so that is why I'm saying estimates, because again, you have buckets of things. It's like this one gets cut, this one is well managed, etc. So how much is the difference between projecting a business as usual, like nothing happens, versus you're reducing by this much the mismanaged waste. So you can have that kind of estimates. But again, to Lynn's point, an accurate finance assessment is really, really needed afterwards at intervention level based on what is the country situation and where you want to go.
Super. Thank you, Patrick. I hope this helps to clarify. And I would like to go back to Willem's question. Willem, feel free to come in. And then we have also Terry a question. Willem, your first question is asking whether the NUM tool seems to be very similar to the Pathways tool. And Margherita, could you explore a bit the differences and why there's a need for another tool? All the countries use or what do the countries to ensure harmonization? And the second question from Willem, how does one estimate the plastic reduction in the model, given it's a universal supported by some countries, given it's not universally supported by some countries?
Yes. Okay. One question at a time. I love the first question because as we're talking here, we have JZ, we have IUCN, we have many more friends, in this space. And I want to say that there is a strong potential for harmonizations, of these methodologies and these tools, because what I'd say is most tools now assess very similar core parameters. Since plastic pollution assessments started, strong in 2015, 2018, we're all evolving towards, I would say, more or less the same key parameters, especially on the baseline. We'll talk about waste generation, we talk about collection, recycling, etc. There is still some differences, and I believe these are mainly about the scope. So I've seen in the questions before a question about why do you focus on municipal solid waste? So actually the plastic fraction of municipal solid waste. In our case is because you have to start somewhere. And this already represents a huge portion of the plastic that ends up mismanaged, right? So aligning on definitions, assumptions, and system boundaries is a way that we can improve compatibility between tools and harmonization. This is definitely something that could be done and should be done to at least manage to compare things. But what I would say is I think it's important that the tool also retains some differences, being scope one of them, or granularity or approaches. For example, plastic hotspotting looks also at a polymer level, and the NUM tool doesn't, right? Why this has to be different? Because it depends what a country needs, right? So it's good that there is choice and that really fits the needs of the country. But it's good that we speak the same language. So I'm super happy that me, Lynn, Stefan, Costas will be here next week, etc. We're all here and we're talking to each other. So the best harmonization we can do in terms of definitions, I would say the best. But it's good that the scope might be different, the granularity might be different, and the point of view also can be different.
Thanks for that. And I'm not sure, Willem, if the second question, if that has been answered, that looks for the reduction of plastics. I guess that's referring to plastic emissions or pollutions in particular.
Yes, sorry. I'm not super sure I understand the question. Would you mind elaborating?
Sure. So obviously in the models, you're wanting to put in the reductions in plastic production as one of the policy interventions. And of course, you need to assume something, either through interaction with stakeholders or some evidence, what particular reductions in what classes of plastics can be achieved. And obviously, it's a prospective view. It's in the future up until 2040. But ideally, you need to align with somebody or something. Otherwise, how do you assume what reduction could be achieved? There's very little buy-in from a lot of the companies. There's no, in the treaty, of course, we haven't seen buy-in from the countries. There's been a big pushback in primary plastic production reductions. So that was more or less put off the table in the treaty quite early on. So it's a very difficult, but I think essential part of the model to try and agree on these really upstream solutions, which is essentially production reductions. Thanks.
Yeah, William, spot on. This is a very good question. And believe me, these are probably the most difficult discussion that we have, in the stakeholder table that I mentioned before. But there is also, again, this realization moment, and this can happen in our approach, and again, in my personal professional opinion, with the scope. So again, NAM tool focus and our GPAP approach focus on municipal solid waste, the plastic fraction of this. What is this? Are they everyday items, right, that everybody uses? So I think this shrinks the conversation to, as you say, some items, some categories of items that everybody uses. We do include those private sector representatives in the conversation. And this is where, sometimes the conversation gets heated because we have to define altogether what are the redundant plastic items. So this is where our elimination part goes. So what are the items that from a consumer perspective, but also private sector perspective, could be actually eliminated? Okay, this is one thing, reduction, but also what business case we can do for refill models, for example. So items that go from single use to reuse models. So this is, again, other conversation that we have, and we land on what could be feasible in the country, given the infrastructure that is already there, what is being planned, and the ambition level. Because, believe it or not, private sector also have huge ambition, in trying to get ahead of the wave, and make sure that, if the consumer are telling me they're interested, I might want to, start thinking how to change things. And the other point is substitution, so different materials. So again, we're having conversation with private sector, public sector, and civil society to say, is there any possibility in the countries for certain items to be switched to a different material? Would it make sense? And which kind of item we could target? But then again, more LCA studies, so life cycle assessment, should be done, to assess feasibility and cost. So to answer your question, we do have estimates which are discussed heavily with private sector as well, but they're very targeted, given our scope is very defined. And this helps a lot the conversation because they want to be engaged in this conversation. They are ready to have it.
Willem, I hope this answers the question. Terry has a question why actually waste is in the focus and plastic waste as the part of the municipal solid waste, and why not other waste streams, potentially larger streams like construction or industrial waste being considered in the tools. Maybe that goes to both Lynn and Margarita.
I would say briefly too, that is a good question. And it could actually, the tools within the UNEP IUCN guidelines could definitely be modified to include broader sectors of waste. Absolutely. One of the challenges that we had when we were creating this was that the focus really was around plastic emissions to the ocean. And that was what the donor, which in our case was, for a lot of our work, was CDAD. And in other cases, it was NORAD. And the focus really was not so much that it was driven by the donors, but that the challenges seen as needing the most sort of efforts towards them were plastic pollution moving into the ocean. And so that's why this was really designed in this sort of framework. I do think it aligns with the issue of general waste management overall. And as we're seeing across the Prevent Waste Alliance, there's the e-waste angle, there's the bio agriculture waste angle. There's a lot of different waste angles that need to be included. And of course, agriculture is something that wasn't included, for example, in the UNEP IUCN tools at a very deep level. It is in there. You can still do some work to try and find some of that. But agricultural plastics, for example, are a really big challenge that needs to be addressed. And it is something that comes into, the environment. And so it's something that I think a lot of different ministries would be interested in understanding how to solve that. So I don't know if Margarita, if you have some additional inputs for that, but I would definitely say that they could be. And this ties into, I think, the questions now is asking as well in the chat.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lynn. I align 100% with what you said. Maybe I just bring one very human component that I've seen with our countries is that municipal solid waste is something that each one of us know what it means, right? So you don't have to think, like before I was doing this job, I had no idea, that agricultural plastic would have been a problem, or like tires abrasion. Like I have no idea. I have to confess that. So, but I grew up with the idea that I should not litter because I do see where where my waste goes, etc. So it's very tangible. Anybody can get on board with that. And in some countries, we have to realize that this conversation is a starting point. And so it gives really the opportunity to start the conversation, addressing the elephant in the room. And then, as Lynn said, we can build on top of that, because agricultural waste is a big problem, industrial waste as well, etc. But also we might have better idea about the quantities that are used, for example, in that case. So there are different challenges for different sectors, and it's good that we start somewhere. I am on the side of let's start with the municipal solid waste, not because I'm biased, because I work on that, but also because there is the human component that everybody understands what this problem is or can be easily convinced, I would say.
Okay, Terry, I hope this answers your question. And then we have an insider here now. You're asking about the differences of the Vestro diagram, hotspotting, and the NUM tool. And I would actually, I would assume you're quite aware about some of the differences. And Jonas had shared already a study who basically portrays common tools and works out and presents differences. For the ones who don't know the study, don't have the time to read, Vestro diagram is a very much bottom-up municipal tool assessing plastic leakages within the waste management system, primary data through observations, and in combination with the Habitat Waste Facilities tool, also really waste composition data. And while the other tools are coming basically top-down, a bit more of action planning tools and have a different scope. Your second question, if all the developers could come together and develop one tool, that's, I think, a very good idea, and it's not a new idea now. And I think you host something which is foreseen to facilitate such a process. Now, the community of practice under the Global Plastic Action, was it the Global GPML? Foresees actually facilitating the exchange on tools and synchronizing and harmonizing these tools. Now, is there anything you'd like to share? Hi, now.
Hi. Thank you so much for this very informative session. Sorry that so we are doing this, but at the same time, like we only can promote, and then for the harmonization, but like we also need how do you say, we can encourage, but it would be great to know whether or not that there's such kind of intention among people and a community to do such kind of stuff, because there's lots of tools that are already being here, and then for countries it might be a bit confusing somehow. But thank you. Sorry.
Yeah,
for
thanks.
jumping in here.
Yeah, Lynn, you like to share some of your insights?
I would just like to say now that after going through 2.5 years almost of plastics treaty negotiations and trying to agree on even text and what it means and what is a problematic plastic, what does this mean in terms of costing, etc. Ideally, having, I think it is the Global Plastics Hub, where there are multiple tools for different countries with different capacities to use. Having one set of tools to identify and mitigate all of these challenges would be an amazing part of sort of a regulatory global framework as well to say, here we go, this is what you have, this is what you need, this is what you do. But seeing the challenges of how the negotiations have gone, and trying to get this sort of at a global level, I don't think would be as effective as regional. And the ASEAN region and the work on what's called the CMAP project for the common methodologies across, now it's 11 ASEAN countries because Timor-Leste just joined. Getting it done at a regional level might be more effective. So you have one region working on one set of monitoring tools, measurement tools, the sort of harmonization at that regional level. And if we can do that from, say, an ASEAN region where they would take the lead almost in global leadership to say, hey, the ASEAN region is doing this now, Europe, you need to learn, you're 27 countries, you know, et cetera. That could be also motivation. I think it depends on the region of the world too, because you have different challenges in each region of the world. But there's some really interesting stuff that could come out of it. But for sure, I would really encourage everybody, if you haven't seen the Global Plastics Hub, definitely go check it out and some of the work that's going on there. And next week, when you hear from Kostas, he's part of this harmonization work as well.
Yeah.
So thanks now. Great questions.
Yeah, no, also, I mean, we discussed it last time already when we presented the wastewater city tour and the wastewater diagram. And I mean, honestly, if you see the bigger trends witin the digital space, I mean, this is really AI and ontologies. I mean, if you see also companies being highly evaluated, and it's potentially nothing else than that. It's about ontologies and make data correspond to each other, and that's not a very trivial part, and it's often not programmed in the tool development. And from our experience, we know it's a lot of additional effort to make the tools, being fluent and sharing data, and it potentially needs some extra effort to really make it for another set of tools as well. And there's definitely a funding gap, because it's the boundaries are often around the tools and the neighboring tools, but the whole picture is often not considered. Okay, then we have a couple of other questions. Terry asks again on the NAM tool if that's integrated or how that is integrated within the municipal planning and budgeting. And Margarita, that I think goes to you. And then we have a second question also on the NUM tool from Steve, asking if the NUM tool relies mainly on secondary data and how can it be deployed effectively in countries with limited data. Maybe these two questions could go to you, Lynn, in a package.
Yes. So to the first one, I think I started answering before, so I take it back in terms of why municipal solid waste, because again, it's a huge part of what ends up in the environment. Again, it's very practical and it's a lot of usage of plastic. First point. Second point, what we considered is municipal solid waste in a sense that this is households and businesses like restaurants, hotels, etc. So always in a municipality, yes, because it includes also non-household in that sense. Yes, mismanaged waste is not only uncollected, correct? How we group it is uncollected, left in dump sites, so not sanitary landfill, open burning, and leakage. So again, this goes to my previous point in harmonizing definition, etc. That would be amazing. Right now, what I believe is that in each of our tool, there is like specific definitions. And so there is a way, and I know now you're working so hard on this to make sure that everything is aligned and we can find, we can compare pears and pears and oranges and oranges. But believe everything is clearly defined. In terms of relying on secondary data, yes, this is the hill I'm willing to die on, in a sense that, yes, we cannot live forever and ever and do everything with secondary data. We all agree. I think there is a lot of scientists here today, and we can all agree on that. At the same time, there is also a limit to, this analysis paralysis, so that there is something that allows us to move in terms of actionability. So what is the level of data understanding that can give us a picture which is realistic and give us, the momentum to start? So for example, if in a country we look at secondary data and we talk to local expert, and the overall picture is that uncollected is over 80%. It won't change much if this is 92 or is 78, because the problem is more like the majority of the waste is uncollected. Okay, and this is what allows for moving forward, and as a first priority for the country then will be, okay, let's get more granular data to urban and rural level, for example, to understand how we could improve collection rates specifically for that area. So this to say, we do rely on secondary data. We also do rely on experts' experience on the ground. Some of them do have primary data that give us. And whenever we don't have local research or local inputs, the NAM tool has pre-loaded databases at international level. So breaking the plastic wave, plastics, World Bank, water waste. So we go back to international databases. That really helps in starting the conversation locally, because it's always good to, you know, provide a number and then having, you know, the room react and say like, that's wrong, I have better. It's like, yes, thank you, I was waiting for that.
Okay, super. Thank you, Margarita. I think we need to wrap up very soon. 2 minutes left, and then you have a very hard cut. You have a next meeting scheduled. Is there anything you'd like to share as a last kind of input into this meeting?
No, just that I replied to William's comment about the issue of municipal or of waste management in general. And it's not just uncollected waste, the mismanaged waste. And we do know that and I think that's just part of the bigger picture of, again, how does all this stuff really get monitored and dealt with effectively? I would just like to say thank you to everybody who came today as well. And I see Dave Newby's here, and I see so many interesting people that are here. And hopefully this was interesting. And if you can share the recording maybe with your contacts or on your LinkedIn or something to bring more people into our circle. I think you know, Margarita did such a great presentation, and it's been a really good day of talking about what we can do and how do we bring all this stuff together. So thank you.
Super. Thank you, then.
Bye.
Margarita, anything from your side as a last word into this meeting?
No, just thanks to everybody, and it's always lovely, you know, to see familiar faces and to work with you. Thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing this insight also from your side. It was really, really great presentation, and thank you, Stefan, for the opportunity.
Yeah, most welcome, and thanks for presentation. For everyone who's in here, the next webinar on global methodologies will be on the 4th of December, 1 p.m. again CET. It features spot methodology, Costas Willis and research team, and potentially another methodology yet to be defined. Looking very much forward meeting you again in this round. Have a wonderful afternoon, and yeah, all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.